Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. I am excited to be able to have a conversation today with Sarah Armstrong, and she is the author of The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. And first of all, I want to welcome you to the show.
Rhonda, thank you so much for having me. Great to be with you.
So, as we kick off, I know that one of the things that, that our listeners may be thinking is, what is a good divorce? And how do we even define that, right?
Yeah.
And so let's start there, and then we'll dive into some tips and ideas that you might have for some of the moms out there.
Great, happy to. So I actually like to start to say, just for the record, I'm not an advocate for divorce. In an ideal world, couples that get married stay happily married for the long term. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And these days, it's more common than ever. So the definition of a good divorce is when a couple puts aside their personal feelings for one another and focuses on what's best for their children. And the way that this really came to light for me is we got divorced when my daughter was 7. And that was about 14 years ago now. And about a year after our divorce, Grace and I were standing in the CVS. And we were at the checkout counter, and there was a People magazine on this newsstand, and it had a celebrity couple that was getting a divorce. And she looked at me and she said, "Mommy, is that a good divorce or a bad divorce?" I said, "Grace, I don't know. What's the difference between a good divorce and a bad divorce?" She goes, "Well, good divorce is when the mommy and daddy are nice to each other like you and daddy. And a bad divorce is when they scream and yell at each other." Mm. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, Grace, it's hard to tell what type of divorce it is from the magazine cover." But as I walked out of the CVS that day, Rhonda, I thought, whatever my ex-husband and I were doing a year after our divorce, that our 8-year-old could really say that we had a good divorce. I felt like we were doing something right. And we say that in air quotes, but we were on the right path. And so this gave me encouragement to keep going and to know that we were doing the best thing for her and that's how she can do this.
Wow. Pretty powerful.
Yeah. It was
pretty powerful.
It was a moment. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. I love that story because I think, at the end of the day, right, that's really, for the people that do have kids, and sometimes, here's the other thing is that whether the kids are minors or it's a gray divorce and the kids are adults and maybe there's grandkids involved. I have several clients right now that are in that phase, there's still this aspect of, making sure that they are being kind and respectful to each other, because no matter when somebody hears that news that their parents are getting divorced, it doesn't really get any easier. We think, oh, they're adults, it's easier. No,
it doesn't. I
it
think
doesn't.
You're 7, 15, or 22 or 30. They're your parents, and I think it's interesting because when a couple goes through divorce and children are involved, regardless of the age, the stakes are high. And we owe it to our children that they're not collateral damage just because we've gone through this divorce.
Yeah.
Each couple that, when you think about it, even though a couple doesn't want to be married to each other, we made a commitment when we brought these children into the world to raise them in the healthiest, happiest, safest environment possible. And, I joke that we cover the plugs, we put bike helmets on when we were young, we feed them organic milk. We try to do all these things.
Totally.
Right? Healthy. And then, but the toxicity that can come from a divorce can have long-term impact on the children's view on relationships, their view on marriage and their overall happiness in life. And so I really think it's our responsibility to take co-parenting seriously with the intent of having a good divorce.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, of course, right, we could have a whole conversation around, well, can you have a good divorce if, you have extra challenges around one person and, whether they, have narcissistic type personality challenges or mental health challenges or addictions. But at the end of the day, I think, we can only be responsible for ourselves and how we conduct ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And do the best that we absolutely can within that. And, so I think, again, is it possible in maybe there's some variations of what a good divorce looks like? But I just want to acknowledge that if you're listening, you're like, this isn't even possible for me. Well, how can you show up?
It's so true, Rhonda. And that's one of the things, by the way, I'm not claiming it's easy, right? But I am claiming it's doable. And it's so worth it for your children to make the effort for what you can control, exactly what you said, the things you can control, how you react in situations, the environment that you create for your children in what you can control. All of those things, all those little things that feel little maybe, add up to how your children are perceiving this significant change in everyone's life. And so I really feel that it is about what you as a mom or as a parent can control in the situation. Because you're right, the other side of the equation may not be a willing participant. And I appreciate that makes it really hard. But it doesn't mean that how you react and how you kind of handle those situations can't be with the right intent.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, how long has it been since you got divorced? How long ago was that?
It's been 14 years. So my daughter's now a sophomore in college. So she was in first grade. We've had a long enough period of time of kind of seeing the evolution of our lives post-divorce, and we're all really happy. I'm happy. Grace is happy. My ex-husband's happy. We're in great phases of life. And actually, my ex-husband and I took Grace to college and helped her move into her dorm room together. That was something I felt she shouldn't have to choose which parent has that milestone with her. Those are moments. You don't get you only move it hopefully into a freshman dorm room once. And, you should be able to have both parents there if they choose to be.
Well, and I think it's helpful too, because again, you have had that longevity, that's a long time. I mean, from the time that they're, in first grade till college, right? This is stuff that you have worked through over a decade, well over a decade. And now you're seeing the fruits of that on the back end, right? You've got a daughter who is independent and, is still feeling that she has the support of both parents. And I think that's a really great example, and hopefully serves as a good encouragement for people. Because I think, when you're in the midst of it, and I'm sure you felt this way, when you're in the midst of it and your kids are little and you're thinking, oh my gosh, right? Like, are they going to be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the biggest concern. By the way, that was for me all along. That was the biggest concern is Grace going to be okay? I say that I have been fortunate. My parents have been married 55 years this year. So I came from a family of just watching a true partnership. But I watched some really, really ugly divorces of my parents' friends growing up. And I saw the impact on those families, on the kids within those families. So I had a mental model, not of a good divorce, by the way, of something very negative. And, so one of the reasons I feel so strongly and spend time talking about this is I don't think there's enough discussion in society about what a good divorce looks like. And the concept of good divorce is an attainable outcome because the models are so negative, right? And really it is this dark cloud that's meant to, and I just don't think it should be this dark cloud that follows you throughout your life and your children's lives. It's getting divorced is an action. You get divorced, but it shouldn't define the rest of your life in terms of some type of negativity. I think you should move past it, even though I know it changes a lot of things, but it can still be a happy life post-divorce.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that certainly is a really good, foundational conversation for kind of diving into. I know that your book is set up to be just really bite-sized pieces, grab it, pick a topic and, read a little something about it, which is great. I know the first thing that we were going to kind of dive into is minimizing the gaps. I know that's what one of the chapters called. So talk to me a little bit about what that means and maybe explain what it is.
Okay. So when you go through divorce and the physical environment is going to change because either you're going to stay in the house and your ex-spouse is going to move or you're going to move, whatever the case is. In our situation, I was keeping the house that we had been raising Grace in, but I knew that we were going to be divvying up all of our household goods and artwork and furniture and family photos. And so one of the really interesting and poignant moments for us in this was that we had a long hallway of black and white family photos that was a combination of my family and my ex-husband's family. And I was thinking, I need to give him his photos. So I took the time to actually get different photos, printed and framed. And so I sent Grace down to a play date down the street. And for about an hour, I took the old photos down and put them in a box and put new photos up and cleaned everything up. And about an hour later, Grace came home and I'm in the kitchen and I hear this little voice from the hallway say, "Hey, mommy, I'm like, what's that, Grace? She said, the wall has changed. And I stopped and I said, well, what's changed, Grace? She said, there are more pictures of me up there. It looks great. And she ran up to her room. And honestly, Rhonda, I stood still and thought, deep breath, because I thought, oh, okay. She didn't say Dad's pictures aren't up there anymore. You know, she took the positive of I'm up there. And what I can reflect back on now is if I hadn't taken the time to print some new photos and put them up where the little hangers were, and I just left the hangers, right? Where all the photos used to be, what Grace would be telling a therapist years from now is my parents got a divorce and my mom took all the photos of my dad off the wall and left those little hangers. Right? That would have been the memory versus the flip side of it is there's more photos of me up there. Now in her room, by the way, we also have family photos and love photos. And so those stayed up in her room throughout until she headed off to college. We actually moved homes and changed environments. But, you know, her father, her grandparents on her dad's side, her aunts and uncles, cousins, they were all in her room all the way through because that's her room. And she deserves to have her whole family, you know, that she can reflect on and smile, see smiling at her. So that's just two different, you know, kind of approaches I took. One was in the more common space and then one was in her room. But in both instances, I felt it was, and those are the little things, Rhonda, that sometimes there's so much coming at you when you go through divorce. But it's one of those moments where if you can stop and think about what's best for how your children are going to take in this change, whatever the change is in their environment, the better off they're going to be.
You know, I love that because I think, you know, what do a lot of people do? They they keep the same picture and then they clip the person out.
Yeah. I mean, and all those things, I mean, those are memories. You're creating a memory for the child that, you know, it might feel good to you. By the way, you can still do that in your bedroom. Go and clip it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
That makes you feel good. Great. Just don't put it back up where your kids can see. You know, that's just not what you need to see. And so I just think it's just, again, it's about, I say this often, it's about taking the high road. Sometimes when taking the high road doesn't seem like an easy road to take, it feels very like a steep mountain.
Yeah.
But it's important to do because your kids are observing everything. They are taking in, and that was the lesson for me in that moment, excuse me, is that Grace I thought that hallway that had the black and white photos was wallpaper. I didn't think she noticed it. It was something she ran up and down every day. But the fact that literally within a minute of being in the house, she noticed it had changed, just showed me how much they notice what's going on in their environment.
Yeah. That's really huge. I love that example. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I think, you know, one of the things that you kind of alluded to was, you know, the fact that, there's going to be the splitting of, you know, things within the home and stuff like that. And, you know, I just wanted to comment on that because I find it like, I remember when I first started my business, I had a woman who basically had said, we're splitting households. And now, you know, I need stuff that like I needed when I first moved out of my parents' home, like, you know, a dishpan and, you know, scrub brush and, you know, all the stuff that you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Like I left that behind or whatever, or that's my, you know, spouse took it. And again, it's not that it wasn't, you know, they weren't necessarily fighting about it. I know some people do, but you know, the stuff that you're like, oh yeah, toilet plunger and the toilet brush and you need new of, right? Sheets, dishes, if that stuff isn't split. One of the resources that I'm part of that, you know, you may have heard of, or, you know, some of our listeners may have heard of, I just want to point out, it's called Fresh Starts Registry. And this organization actually helps people kind of create their Amazon wish list so that if people are like, hey, what could I do to help you kind of, you know, refresh certain aspects of your new place, that, you know, you can actually create a registry, because people are like, well, what can I do to help you? And sometimes you're like, oh, nothing, I'll just figure it out. But there is a way that you can have people kind of help give you a divorce shower, I guess you could say.
I haven't heard about the Fresh Start Registry, but I love the concept.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. And you know, I think the other thing too around the photos that I have seen, and people fight over the photos. I mean, so the fact that you were able to swap them out and kind of figure that out is a big deal because people do fight over them. But one of the other things is sometimes there are organizations that or businesses that will, scan the photos, make sure that both parties have a copy, and you could even have them put it into kind of a memory type book, with your selected photos, and they could have their selected photos, but you have them electronically. And even if they're older, I mean, even some of the ones where, there's no way that you would have them electronically. They have some really nice ways to do that in a pretty fast way where you're not like standing at your computer printer and scanning. They have a fast way to be able to save those if anybody is looking to keep some of those electronically. That certainly might be the way to go.
No, it's those memories are important to keep, and it's just a matter of how you share them.
Yeah, I love the example of swapping out the photos though, because I think that is one of those things where they're like, I don't really know what to do. They just take them down, right? So that was awesome. I love that example. I know one of the other things is, set a goal to never pack a bag is what you call kind of the next tip. And talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So there was a moment before we got divorced, right before we were going to tell Grace, that we went to see a child specialist that was going to meet with Grace once we told her. And he sat down and looked at me and he said, Sarah, do you travel? And I said, yeah, I travel internationally for my job. And he looked at my ex-husband and he said, do you travel? And he said, yes, I travel domestically. He said, well, Grace is about to become a professional traveler. She's going to travel every week for the next 11 years until she heads off to college. And she's going to have to pack a bag. And I burst into tears. And I thought, that is not what I want for Grace. She doesn't deserve that. That's not, that's not how I want her life to be lived. And so when we walked out of that session, I looked at my ex-husband. I said, I want us to figure out how we minimize the feeling that Grace is a professional traveler and that she's having to pack a bag every week. And so now I realize some of the things I'm going to share have some socioeconomic considerations. But what we decided to do is have as many of the basics at both homes. So socks, underwear, maybe an extra pair of jeans, shorts and t-shirts, pajamas, whatever the case is. So that when Grace left home to go to whichever parent's house, she just had her backpack for school. She wasn't carrying another bag, whether it was to school or to soccer practice or whatever the case, in that she could then show up at the other home and kind of be at that home and just have it feel like home. Now, having said that, Rhonda, one of the things I always kind of laugh about is things would get out of balance. Like somehow all the socks ended up in one house. I do not know how that happened. It always And so we'd have what I call rebalancing weeks, which I'd ping my ex-husband and say, hey, I think we need to rebalance, I don't have any socks over here. And so we would go through, and by the way, it was up to us to do this. It wasn't to say, hey, Grace, can you go figure out what needs to go back to mom's or what needs to go back to dad's? She didn't choose to live across two homes. That wasn't her choice. So we would take it upon ourselves to go in. And again, she was young, so we could go in and kind of pull things out and say, you have two of these t-shirts, one goes back to mom's and one goes back to dad's. And then we would carry it and hand it to the other when we because again, it's not for Grace. She didn't choose this. So that was an important piece. So the setting the goal of never packing a bag was just kind of a theme that we put into our day-to-day. Now there are those special things. Grace played golf, so she only get one set of golf clubs. They had to go back and forth. The other thing is, the dress shoes, we might not buy two pairs of dress shoes. So there were mornings, and this is another piece of it that you have to really take a moment and pause is, there'd be the morning where it was dress up day at school and Grace would come down and say, my dress up shoes are at dad's. And, I've cut it very close. We have 5 minutes to get out the door. And I just nod and go, okay, well, let's go get them. He lived within 10 minutes of our house. So that, again, I couldn't get upset with her. Again, she didn't choose to live across two homes and keep track of where her things are. So I just had to take a deep breath and say, we might be a little late for school, but we're going to go get the dress up shoes. And we did that.
Yeah. I mean, I just, another great, just a really great example. And I think, I love the, rebalancing, because that does happen, right? Where you're like, yeah, all my snow stuff is at one house or all my whatever. And you're like, and I think people feel pressure that they have to, either have their own, or the parents aren't on board, and one party's like, yeah, well, they're at my house, too bad, so sad, like,
Yeah. And again,
yeah,
that's right. In those moments, it's unfortunately the too bad, too sad is the child. And it's like, but they shouldn't be the ones that feel like they shouldn't be feeling that extra pressure or that extra loss of like the thing they thought they had. And so it really is. And again, these are the small things, Rod. I talk about so much in my book are these, they seem like small things, but they can accumulate into a bigger perception of what's happened to this child's life or the children's lives. And so I just think if we can take each of them and try to think about how we make that situation the best it can be, then over the course of time, those things do add up into a more positive experience post-divorce versus that negativity and the negative cloud that can follow everyone because they think nothing's going right.
yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and I think it's, I think the foresight on that is really important, right? Because a lot of it is practical and, just being on the same page to minimize those issues post-divorce. And, the little details matter. It's like they really do. I had a client this morning say, Rhonda, I feel like I may be getting in the weeds. And there's a balance with that. I mean, you got to keep the big picture in mind, but the details are important.
They are.
And, and these are going to be things that, I mean, you're not going to put in your marital settlement agreement, rebalance the socks, but at the end of the day.
No, you're not, but it's so true. But I think the more you do put into your settlement agreement that helps to allow the rebalancing the socks to be not this big deal.
Yeah.
Is part of what you have to think about when you think about the parenting plan you put in place and the decisions that you try to make in advance to allow the path, because we had a long journey. We had 11 years of raising co-parenting Grace, across two households. And so what were those decisions and things that we needed to do to make sure that it wasn't like every time that decision was made, we were having to reopen things and rediscuss, So we did a lot in our parenting plan to try to make a lot of those. And then one moment, Rhonda, that I reflect on that stuck with me and really was another reflection was when Grace was in 6th grade and we went to her parent-teacher conference. And at that stage in her school, the child goes to the parent-teacher conference with the parents. So my ex-husband and I go with Grace. We show up, we sit down with her teacher for an hour. And at the end of the discussion, about an hour in, the teacher looks at us. She goes, "Wait a minute, are you two divorced?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we've been divorced for 5 years." She said, "I had no idea." And I said, "Well, it didn't occur to me to walk in and say, 'Hi, we're divorced. Can we now talk about Grace's education?'" I'm like, why did, and I said, I didn't think it mattered to tell you. And she said, it's amazing how few couples that are divorced can come and sit in this office for 1 hour with their child and talk about their child's education. It is so, so rare. And it makes me really sad.
Mm.
I said to her, that makes me so sad to hear. Now, by the way, Grace is hearing this entire discussion. And I said, it makes me sad because what should be more important to two parents than being able to come and sit down with their child's teacher and hear how their child is in school?
Yeah.
Let's look at that and say, why can't you set everything aside? Now, I know there are instances where you cannot be in the physical presence of someone, and I appreciate that. And I so appreciate that it's not possible. But for the other percentage of cases where you could be, why not do that for your kids? Also, by the way, then for the teachers, all those teachers have to do 2 parent-teacher conferences for other divorced families.
Right.
And so, but I mean, for your kid first, it's like, why wouldn't you want to do that so that you can all hear the same thing and reflect on it together and go, gosh, great job. And how you did in English or in Spanish or whatever the case is. So I thought that was just another one of those moments that really struck me on our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, all just really good, practical, applications. And so we have just a couple moments left. Pick one more tip that kind of is top of mind that you want to make sure that our listeners know during our time together.
I think one that I like to leave people with is the concept of developing a compartmentalization muscle. Now, I do Pilates, and so we focus on your core muscle, which you always want to have strong. But I don't think we do enough in life to build our compartmentalization muscle. And what that means is that you are able to think about when you're in a situation where you're wanting to react emotionally to whatever's going on, you think about if your children are in your presence, is now the time for me to react that way? Or do I set that aside for a minute? I can still go and scream or cry or yell or tell my best friend or my family member, how upset I am. But for your child in that moment, do they need to see those emotions? Is that something that benefits them to see? And generally, I think the answer is no. And so building a compartmentalization muscle that allows you to set it aside for a moment, get through that moment, and then continue on is so important. And I realize, again, this is easier said than done. And there are moments that you can be triggered. There's moments when you're like, oh, that just, set me off. And the other person may be trying to antagonize you and push your buttons. That can happen. But in those moments, let them push their buttons and just take a deep breath and do not react. Just let the moment pass. And so the compartmentalization muscle is something I think we could use in lots of aspects of life, but I use it in this divorce and post-divorce stage because I think it really is an important muscle to have when you're trying to work through those moments that do present themselves. They're going to. But how you react in those can make such a difference in terms of how your child is perceiving this next phase of the divorce, wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick question about that? Was there kind of a go-to phrase that you had in those moments where, you would say something that was more general to, what would you say?
I just to myself, I would just kind of say, there was almost like, I would say, it was just like, do not engage, like just, it's not worth it. And just like a little quiet moment to myself, do not engage. It's not going to benefit. And so quietly, it's your inner voice. But I do think it's, you have to figure out what's that saying, what's that comment you make to yourself.
Yeah. I know one of the things I'll sometimes encourage my clients to say is, and if they felt like, again, each situation is going to be a little different, but they could say something like, hey, I'm happy to have this conversation, at a later time or
Absolutely.
privately or,
Absolutely.
And you just become a broken record with it. You can just have your one go-to line that they continue to put, hey, I'm happy to have this conversation when, we can talk privately. I'm happy to have the conversation. I mean, you just become a broken record.
But, but your kids see that. And that's a great message for them is that mom really doesn't want to get into the messiness here right now. And it's not the time to. And so your kids pick up on that too. And that's a signal that you're trying to protect them.
Yeah.
From activity that they shouldn't have to be exposed to. They've been exposed to enough, most likely. So the more that you use that phrase, and I love the saying, then you're protecting them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I am so glad we could spend a few moments, just some really fun, practical, insightful tips that you have learned over the years in this co-parenting role. And you know what? I know it's not done, right? You're still co-parenting and there's still going to be major life events that happen that the two of you are going to need to be, participating in on behalf of Grace. And I think, you certainly have a lot of really great experience and insight to share. So I definitely want to thank you for your time today. We will make sure that we include your contact information, information about the book and all of those kinds of things in the show notes. But I definitely want to just thank you for your time today and sharing your passion with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for having me. And I do hope everyone that's listening knows that it's worth the effort to try to have a good divorce, and it is an attainable outcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Bye-bye.